We're back in session. We have three, as I was just saying, my three most interesting budget presentations: special education, curriculum and instruction, and early learning and community enrichment. So Dr. Valesky or Ms. Juliana, whoever wants to kick it off.
Mr. Juliana, go ahead and introduce the lucky presenters.
The lucky presenters are, let's stroll from the hat.
We have an order here.
So, yes, we do. So, just by way of a little bit of background, as part of our budget process, we're continuing with the presentation of various segments. Tonight, our segments are special education, curriculum and instruction, and then early learning and community enrichment. So first off, for special education, we have Sharon Weber-Olszkiewicz, who is the interim director for special education.
All right. Welcome, Ms. Olszkiewicz.
Yes, thank you. I thought I haven't missed a year with this yet, right? But I can assure you, after those two wonderful presentations, mine will not be so engaging. But the budget is an important process because it continues to allow the excellent programs and services we provide as a school district. So, thank you for allowing me to present. The first thing in your packet, so I'll go through it quickly and then we could have questions if that's the format you'd like to use.
Sure.
Is a breakdown of out-of-district tuition. Now, you know last year we were at the all-time low of 62 students. When I look back historically, at one point we were at 130 students. So the reason the district was able to significantly reduce is because the board supported the creation of specialized programs in the district, so students were able to be educated in their neighboring schools. So kudos to you. There was a rise to 68. That sometimes happens when students move in or we can't provide the program in district. So you'll notice that there was an increase in tuition if you look across the budget lines. You will also see, which I think is an interesting addition, the special education program sections. I think that's helpful for you as a board because it gives you an overview of how many specialized programs we run for special education. And if you look, it's 38. 12 of those are for students with autism, self-contained, but it's broken down. So that is what you've supported and have allowed us to maintain students in district. So thank you for that. So in our budget, of course, it's a comprehensive budget. All of these services are really mandated by state and federal code. We're in compliance. We also do a wonderful job with it because just like we do with all students, gifted and not gifted students, special ed has always been an area where this board has not shortchanged, which does occur in other districts, unfortunately. So we have our tuition, and you'll notice the tuition is broken down in the categories that's set forth really by the state: private schools, public separate state facilities. Then we have medical evaluations, just so you know. When a child is referred or reevaluated, we have a duty to explore the nature and scope of the disabling condition. So sometimes that requires a neurological. It definitely requires a neurological if we're looking at the classification of autism, as well as psychiatric evaluations. The OT-PT services, those are set forth by the IEP team. It's occupational physical therapists do conduct the evaluation to determine eligibility. We've discussed this in the past. When we broke down the services, it still wasn't cost effective for the district to hire. And I just did a quick calculation. It doesn't appear to be cost effective for you to still hire your own people at this point. Maybe sometimes in the future. Speech supplies allow the speech therapist to purchase their protocols and any new testing. You always have to stay current on the state assessment. You have to use things that are normed and standardized when they revise. The extraordinary services, those are for students that are require one-to-one aids, and sometimes they do. By the nature of their disability, there's 17 one-to-one aids. We have nurses on the bus. Those are for students that have usually medical conditions or seizure disorders. The only people that can administer medication by the education code is an RN, not an LPN. So we've made the decision at the board that we didn't want to put those students at risk And because some districts do pull the bus over and call 911, but really, you're putting a child at risk when you do that. So this
Sherry,
board.
before you move on from there, if a student is assigned an aide or a nurse on the bus for behavioral reasons as
Yes.
opposed to medical reasons, then the LPN, RN thing doesn't come into effect. Is that correct?
No, if we assign an aide to the bus, it's usually because of behavioral reasons. We wouldn't assign an RN. That's usually for medical, and the students that receive one-to-one nursing services usually have one-to-one nursing services within the home too, because they're medically fragile. And that's usually because they're G-tubed, they're on oxygen, they have uncontrolled seizures, or some unique medical condition where really they're very fragile, and we wouldn't assume that risk. We have specialized equipment, augmentative devices. The independent CST evals, I just wanted to point that out. Those are usually reserved for bilingual evals. Now, when you look at your 3-year comparison, you're going to see a large fee at 1 year. We also use this line if a learning consultant, psychologist, social worker are out on sick leave, speech therapists also. They are not readily available as substitutes because of the specialty and the demand of their disciplines, so we usually have to contract out with an agency to be able to fill that service. If we could turn to, and I'll have to do my pages. Page 30 is where we talked about new teachers. So how we plan for staff, because the New Jersey Code, it's very prescriptive, the numbers that you could have in a special ed class. The department is always very careful and very accurate in the projections. So we really know what staff we need for the upcoming year, you know, barring the fluke of 100 students moving in, which has never happened in all of my years of experience. So you see on top, we're requesting an LLD teacher for Churchill. Those are students moving up from Hammarskjöld that still require that specialized setting. But below it, you'll be able to see that we are going to really just convert a resource room position over because we have enough teaching staff in that building to be able to do so. So it's really no additional staff for you. It's a different light on them. You're up one in LLD, you're down one in resource. The instructional aide is a new position because with self-contained, we do need the numbers, we do need the aide and classroom supplies for supplemental materials to begin that program. The teacher resource room, we did notice that we're up at the elementary level. It was tight this year, so you'll need, as of now, an elementary resource room teacher. We carefully examine our numbers, so if there's a change in that during the year, we usually alert the business office. But as of now, we need it. Also, because they created the physics class at the high school, whatever's created in general ed impacts on special ed for a mandated course subject. So we now have to provide that service to the students as well, which is wonderful. But it does, you do need a teacher to do that. And that's probably going to be a difficult position to find because you have to have your special ed certification and have subject matter physics. A teacher of autism, we have students moving up to the high school. Previously, we were able to move them to the MD's class, but there are students that still require an ABA program, which is very intense and a specific time of training. So we recognize to keep these students in district, you have to create the program. Last year, you lost a student because they still required that ABA, and the MD program did not sit well. Home instruction, that always varies. We talked about that in the past. That's usually a line item used. There's very few students we put on home instruction with the IEP. A lot of that budget line goes to students that have been hospitalized, either for medical illness, substance abuse issues, and we're obligated to pay the home instruction fee. One facility day top, although we don't really have a choice in what you pay, but they're expensive at $249. So just so you realize that. We currently have which I'm delighted to say. 1,017 students that are classified in the district, and 155 speech. So you're keeping the classification rate where it should be as a district and not exceeding, which means that we're doing more in general education and with intervention to service students with those mild issues within the context of general ed, because nobody really wants, the goal is not to classify a student disabled by any means. Vicki, did you have a question?
Sharon, I just wanted you to flesh out a little something that you referred to. We just talked about this last night in finance, and I think we've talked about this every year, and when the special ed budget is presented. The cost of tuition for out-of-district placement, that there is no regulation by the state on
Yes.
a tuition cap, that we are at the mercy of whatever these schools want to charge, that they can raise their rates every year, mid-year, come back and say, oh, that wasn't really the tuition, you owe us more money.
Yes, absolutely.
But-
So although you as a school district have a 2% cap, the private schools do not have that same cap. They also have a strong lobbying group. So politically, they've gotten their way. Years ago, and it's been so many years that I can't even remember, they did cap private school tuition. But they eliminated that. So you could go up 4%, you could go up 8%. We do our best to estimate that. The business office builds in the increase. However, with that said, once a school district, I believe, get audited by the state, they could decide that they've accepted 6 students where they really thought they were 8 students, and they could back bill you. So the back bill could be $10,000 for 5 students, making it $50,000. You as a school district cannot allocate those funds, so you have to come up with the money. It's a very unfair process. The more difficult child to place, the higher the tuition. Obviously, the more complex the issues, the more aggressive the child, the higher the tuition. Sometimes I don't understand how the high tuition rate really matches what they're charging us as a tuition rate. And with that said, in finance, we discussed how IDA, the business office was told to plan on 80% of the IDA grant, which implies that there will be a cut. Special ed was never really fully funded, but you do have to be in compliant with the regulations. So it's really a system that's out of balance, and at some time, not here thankfully, but in some districts have caused major layoffs, like art teachers, because if 4 students move in and just save their $60,000 for tuition a child, small districts have very hard times finding that type of money. So it's unfortunate, and sometimes it creates very bad feelings within the community because parents feel that their children aren't being serviced because of this. So,
And that's also why you'll hear us talk about, but also you, and you just did, when the district can start a program in district, that the cost of the teacher, the curriculum, whatever other costs are associated it, will be so much more cost efficient
absolutely.
than sending a student out at 60 to 100,000 a year. So that's why we have always encouraged, and you have always encouraged us to do that, to bring district programs in district.
Absolutely. And there are some students, let it be said, though, you'd have a very hard time
Right, absolutely.
addressing the needs in a public school. But we have talked about, we still notice that there are a lot of students with psychiatric issues. They emerge in secondary school, which is when mental health issues often start to demonstrate. So those are students probably long-term. We had talked about that before. You want to think about creation of a program. Space right now is an issue, though, for you. And that's part of the problem as well, because you have to have the space. In the past, we were very fortunate. We had the space to create, you've built buildings to accommodate our programs, which was wonderful, but you have to really design a building sometimes for that.
I think it's important for the public to know, too, that the Educational Services Commission of New Jersey, where this board has appointed me to represent you on that board, this has become a topic of active discussion this year about the cost of private placements
Right.
and the unregulated situation that we find ourselves in with some of these schools just charging, the sky's the limit, whatever the consumer can pay.
Correct, and not only that, I mean, I just got a call today, so I have a private school for a student that is involved emotionally, they don't want him anymore. Well, they don't have the same obligation as a public school, so they just discharge and terminate.
Right.
Which really, you have to question, should they be able to do that so easily also?
Right.
So there
Sharon,
it
do you
is.
ever find in your experience private institutions that offer the same or very similar services, and that the 2 or 3 or however many different institutions are involved have widely varying tuitions? Or do you ever find that they tend to, kind of close ranks around that high figure?
I find that, like the public separate schools, tuition is usually lower than a private school, and some of those private schools do offer similar programs. I have to say, I think we do it the best curriculum, but when you go into more of those high range, like Douglas and Eden, that's a very select population that most schools will not take, just because of the nature of the population. They're very involved, a lot of them self-mutilate, a lot of them are very physically aggressive. So those are students that those schools charge high tuition, but there's really not a lot of options, at least in this state. Personally, I think it would be nice, like in New York, you have a state and other states as well that kind of provide the range of services for all the public school systems.
Who makes
They
the
don't do
final
that in New
determination?
Jersey.
When you do the out-of-placement, do you make the final determination of
The
where they're gonna
IEP
place?
team is, but here's what we do. We have to, in the code, they explain least restrictive environment. So every child, you're supposed to start at the general ed and work your way down. The logical step, after we can't provide, is another public school, which quite honestly doesn't happen because we have our own programs, or a public separate school, which would be the Ed Services Commission, Morris Union Jointure, Mercer County, but they have limited spots. So sometimes they don't have any vacancies and we have to place the child. And once the child's placed, it's not fair to the child to move when they're settled. But that's what the decision-making is. Now, we know with some significant students, you'll send out the applications, but we will get no response.
Do the parents have any say in placement, or is it strictly?
Always, they're part of the IEP team.
Oh, they are?
So, yeah, so parents always have a vote. There's a process we're in disagreement, but when we do the application, we go look at placements with the parents and the student, because they have to be comfortable too. With that said, you do lose something when you send them out of district. You lose, I think, some of that connection to your community, which is unfortunate. I think we've gotten a little bit better with that, but there's still the disconnect. I mean, when we service students in district, first of all, it's wonderful for all students. Because we are a diverse population, it's a diverse world, and it's good to acknowledge each other's strengths as well as our differences, and recognize that we're all contributing members of society. So that's really what inclusive schools does. When they have friends, they have community involvement, they could participate, even students with significant disabilities, we have them go to after school. When it's the out of district, even though you try and have them come like for an after school club, it's hard because they don't have that involvement with the peers. So it's like showing up to an activity where you have no connection. And they're children, and they like that level of comfort. So, as they should. Do we have
Anyone
any
else?
other issues?
All right.
Thank you.
Mrs.
Excellent.
Olszewicz,
Well,
thank you
you.
for making this
Excellent.
understandable again for us. It's great.
Yes, and it's
I really
wonderful
do.
seeing everybody again.
Thanks, Sharon.
Thank you.
Seeing
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next.
Ah.
Brought a cheering section with you?
Well deserved, there we go.